Jim, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, John. In my view of the world, South Africa doesn't fit into either. But there you go. It is a great honour to be here with you all. I have to say it's particularly pleasing because despite the fact I spend most of my time travelling around the world, this is my debut in Malta. So it's a real pleasure to be here. And as I'm sure some of you know, amongst other things I do in my life, I am completely obsessed by Manchester United, and Malta has one of the biggest Manchester United supporters clubs in the world. So for that, Malta knows a lot more about issues about Europe than most other countries. Alone. So I have been asked to talk about a number of issues related to the underlying theme, but I'm going to concentrate on the latter one, is Europe on the mend? And I've sort of got a loose linkage of 6 different points I want to make and to provoke as part of the discussion. And for those of you that don't have a great deal of time or don't want to listen to the rest of my time, the answer is yes, but not really. So let me start by actually showing you this picture. Can you see this picture from the back? So, thank you. So first of all, cyclically, rather intriguingly, it does look as though Europe is on the mend. And in fact, I would suggest the kind of indicators that I've learned to follow for more than the past 30 years, actually one of the surprises of 2014 to date is that the pickup in Europe is more than consensus forecasters are saying. Not a lot, but it is more, whereas in 1 or 2 other places it's at best as expected, if not a little bit disappointing. This is the monthly Purchasing Managers Survey for the Euro area, and it is, as you can see, showing quite a bit of recovery. What is especially intriguing behind that is that the so-called periphery has shown quite strong signs in that. The very latest ones we had yesterday, which this does not incorporate, the services sector managers survey, and from it the so-called composite one, even Italy showed a notable improvement, and a feature of the year has been a recovery in Spain. So if it were just that, then the answer to the second part of the session of this, of the title of this session is yes, Europe is on the mend. Unfortunately, and I'll now spend my other 5 points going through aspects of this, most of the other things lead me to an opposite conclusion. And the second thing I would say is that the main reason why the European cyclical economy is on the mend actually is probably related to the fact that most other developed economies cyclically are showing signs of improvement. Even the UK, where I reside when I'm not travelling around the world, is showing a similarly, actually, if not anything, a stronger sign of such cyclical recovery too. And I think there's probably some common theme rather than it being something to do with policy in either place. That said, if there is, and I'm sure you talked about it yesterday, John, in my opinion, it is almost definitely down to the famous Mario Draghi Super Mario moments just ahead of the UK Olympics when he said, and I was sat 15 yards away from him when he said it, he will do whatever it takes, which is essentially for risk takers completely changed the parameters of the risk versus return and encouraged so many people to, instead of panic and sell peripheral bond markets and assets, increasingly actually encourage them to buy them. And it's quite interesting as this year gets underway, even despite the volatility in global financial markets, the peripheral European bond markets and their equity markets are the strongest in the world to date. And I think it's a symptom of that. Unfortunately, when it comes to some of the bigger structural issues, they have sort of been, in my judgment, parked on the shelf. And whilst we can perhaps celebrate that banking union is sort of completed in concept. It seems to me in practice it is, along with many other issues like fiscal policy and fiscal union, and as I'll talk about now, even more basic economic issues facing Europe's governance, far from in a stable position. I'm choosing to show you this chart because to throw in a third point, and some of you will think two things as I say it. One, it's quite controversial, and two, well, he would say that as somebody that worked for Goldman Sachs for 20 years. But in my judgment, and I apologize to the finance minister, slightly in some level a different view. This was not a crisis caused by finance. Finance was sitting in the middle of two very basic things going on in the world. The United States was saving nothing and borrowing money from the rest of the world to build houses and allow people that didn't have any income as well to own houses. And on the other side of the world, we had China that was saving idiotic amounts of money and not really doing anything other than sending it to invest overseas. Now, I'm saying this because if you look at the US and Chinese balance of payment situations 5 years on, yesterday being the 5th anniversary of the bottom of the stock markets, actually the signs are rather good. This is in red, the Chinese current account surplus, which is now less than 3% of GDP. When we went into this mess, it was 10%. Now, that is not the real reason why I'm showing it, but bringing it back to the topic of this session, Germany's current account surplus today is 7% of GDP. If it were on a chart, it would be up here, if you could see where this green pointer is. In dollar terms, Germany's current account surplus today is bigger than China's. And what I find intriguing is, of course, along with so many other things, German policymakers are eager to have these quite, at least conceptually, rigid notions of various objectives. And after the crisis, they suggested for Europe, current account balances should be added as well. But now that theirs has actually gone up, despite others improving, the Germans are saying, well, we have no obligation to do anything about that. And in my judgment, that is a highly unstable state of affairs. And again, John, I don't know whether you talked about it yesterday, but it's rather good, in my opinion, that the EU has come out and actually said yesterday, Germany needs to do something about that. And they are right. Now, if that were not enough, an even more fundamental issue with economic policy, in my judgment, is becoming a bigger and bigger problem, and it shouldn't really have been one. The ECB has an inflation target of very weird, as everybody knows, of some sort of strange just below 2%. The only reason why they have that is, of course, because of the pressure historically and success of Germany. As these peripheral countries try to continue with the very tough life that they've been faced with, and it's very interesting to hear the finance minister quite rightly stand up and say, well, we're not going to turn ourselves from a bread basket to a basket. Right now, in my opinion, there is absolutely no chance of the ECB reaching that target unless Germany starts to think differently. Germany needs to accept that inflation can go above 2%. So there are two new, very fundamental problems that are being created by the policymakers on top of the ones that still remain from the pre-crisis days. And luckily, Super Mario's generosity in terms of this commitment to do whatever it takes, in my opinion, are sort of covering the underlying dilemmas that remain. And in fact are getting bigger. Now, two other issues, and then I will stop, and the last one is going to be touching about the UK and specifically to do with finance. But I thought I'd also show you this picture. As John said, these days, amongst other things I'm doing, I'm a visiting research fellow at the European think tank Bruegel. And just last week, with one of the research assistants there, we published a paper that showed if those challenges are not enough, then on top of it, there are even more fundamental ones that are going to get bigger and not really acknowledged by European policymakers. And in this paper, we project forward into 2020 as to what the world is going to look like. And as John knows, as I'm sure many of you know, linked to the whole BRIC thing, I've become quite well known for trying to guess what the world would look like by 2050. So if I'm trying to do it at 2020, at least that's in the realms of reasonable possibilities as opposed to the fantasy of 2050. This is a picture that shows you the probable or possible export patterns for some key European or Eurozone member countries. And at the core of it, what it's showing you, and this is only 6.5 years away, by 2020, Germany will be exporting more to China than it does to France, which I sort of knew before we did this exercise. But what I didn't know is that France might be nearly exporting more to China than it's doing to Germany. And so the actual fundamental optimal currency zone theory, which underlies why we have EMU in the first place, are going to get weaker and weaker. And so unless the policymakers work a lot harder on trying to do really important things in a true pro-European sense, it is a real danger in thinking that this set of problems are really behind us, in my opinion. Which leads me to the last topic of, again, what we're really here to talk about, I guess, is finance. And I thought I'd reflect a lot about what I just said, and particularly with the UK's peculiar angle, and just 3 comments. The first one of which is, as I've sort of deliberately done in the short time I've had to present to you, I don't really think it is right for policymakers to spend all their efforts on financial regulation when the financial problems are probably a consequence of underlying bigger economic things that cause these crises, because they're just symptoms rather than causes. Secondly, in that regard, just as for Malta, the UK has a few things to offer the world, not your sunshine, but probably Premier League football, or it did when Manchester United were good, and finance. And if European policymakers continue to be so obsessed on trying to control finance as some notional salvation to what's happened to the world and Europe, it is right for the UK, in my judgment, to question what is the benefit of being part of this. A good friend of mine in the hedge fund world told me yesterday that so far this year, I don't know whether it's true because I'm removed from the markets a bit these days, but the second largest traded currency in terms of their client business, and this is one of the world's biggest prime brokers, in London, is in the Chinese RMB, so far this year. And if there is going to be a whole series of things along the lines of the financial transactions tax and the like, it is right for the UK to question increasingly, and away from the mad politics of the UK, it is right for them to question what is this great benefit of being involved in this, in my opinion, controversially. And hopefully, and I believe there was some of this said by Mario Monti, my old friend from Bruegel last night, that he thinks it's important that European policymakers try to do more to try and keep the UK on side. But they want to start doing that by doing more sensible things when it comes to thinking about the relative importance of financial policy compared to the much more substantive thing of doing the right thing in terms of economic policy. And on that, I shall stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.